At 3 in the morning, a black man stood alone in a dead quiet industrial kitchen, his knife moving through vegetables with the precision of someone who had trained for years in kitchens most people couldn't get a reservation at. He didn't know a woman in a maintenance uniform was watching him from across the room. He didn't know she was the CEO of the company that was about to fire him. What she did next would change both of their lives. Carol Carter had been wearing the same steel-toed boots for 4 days, and they still hadn't broken in. The blisters on her heels were raw, rubbing against thick socks every time she crossed the kitchen floor. She welcomed the pain. It reminded her that this was real, not a quarterly report, not a conference call, not a spreadsheet full of numbers that reduced human beings to labor costs. She had arrived at the Midtown branch on a Monday, introducing herself as a temporary maintenance hire. Nobody questioned it. Nobody cared. The branch was understaffed and bleeding money, and anyone willing to scrub grease traps at 2 in the morning was a warm body they didn't have to fight for. The night manager barely glanced at her paperwork before handing her a mop and pointing toward the back. That was how Kara wanted it. Invisible, forgettable. Just another tired face in a building full of them. The first 2 nights she mapped the operation with the quiet precision of someone who had built a restaurant empire from a single location. She noted the inventory mismanagement, the inconsistent food storage temperatures, the fryer that should have been replaced 3 years ago. She cataloged everything, filed it away in her mind, the way she filed away profit margins and expansion timelines. But on the 3rd night, she noticed Windy Hill. He was already there when she arrived at 1:45 in the morning, standing at the far prep station with his back to the door. A tall man, broad-shouldered but lean in the way people got when they burned more calories than they consumed. His dark skin caught the blue-white glare of the overhead lights. A faded black t-shirt, gray kitchen pants, non-slip shoes that had seen better days. He was chopping onions, and the sound stopped Kara mid-step. It wasn't the clumsy hacking she'd heard from most prep workers in her 20 years of running restaurants. This was something else entirely. The knife moved in a consistent, rapid rhythm, tap, 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 each slice identical in width, each motion economical, wasted effort stripped away like fat from a cut of meat. His left hand curled over the onion in a perfect claw grip, fingertips tucked, knuckles guiding the blade. Textbook technique. The kind taught in culinary programs, not picked up from watching YouTube videos on a smoke break. Kara watched for a full minute before he even registered her presence. When he finally glanced over his shoulder, his expression didn't change. A brief nod. Nothing more. Then back to the onions. Over the next 2 nights, she learned his pattern. Windy arrived before anyone else on the night crew, sometimes as early as 1:30. He prepped vegetables, portioned proteins, organized the walk-in cooler, and handled whatever tasks had been left undone by the evening shift. He worked steadily, without urgency, but without pause, like a man who had made peace with the mechanics of labor the way monks made peace with silence. He never arrived late. He never left early. He never complained about the assignments, the temperature of the kitchen, or the fact that the ventilation system wheezed like a dying animal every 15 minutes. If there was extra work, he took it. If someone called out sick, he covered. He was by every measurable standard the most reliable employee in the building, and nobody seemed to notice. Derek Walsh did not notice. Derek was the night shift manager, a compact, restless man in his mid-30s who moved through the kitchen like someone perpetually late for something more important. He wore his authority the way some men wore cheap cologne, too much, too obvious, and impossible to ignore. His management style was transactional. Tasks were distributed based on whoever was closest, and problems were solved by whoever was most willing to absorb them. That person almost always was Windy. Kara watched it happen with surgical attention. On her 4th night, Derek assigned Windy to unload a delivery truck, after Windy had already completed a full prep cycle, 4 hours of continuous knife work. Derek didn't ask. He walked past the prep station, pointed at Windy without making eye contact, and said, "Truck's here. Handle it." Windy set down his knife, wiped his hands on his apron, and walked toward the loading dock without a word. No, please. No, thank you. No use of his name. Kara had seen this before in her restaurants. Not cruelty, nothing dramatic enough to file a complaint about. Just eraser. The quiet, systematic way certain workers became furniture. You used them. You relied on them, but you never saw them. She found herself keeping a mental file on Derek's behavior the way she kept files on everything else. Not because he was malicious, because he was ordinary. He was the product of a system that measured people in output and cost, and in that system, Wendy was efficient and cheap. That was all Derek needed to know. On the fifth night, something small happened. Small enough that Derek missed it, that the security cameras wouldn't have flagged it, that no quarterly review would ever capture it. A new hire, a kid named Tyler, barely 19, with shaky hands and a face that broadcast every ounce of his anxiety, had been assigned to portion chicken breasts. He was doing it wrong. The cuts were uneven, the portions inconsistent, and he was burning through product at a rate that would have made any cost-conscious manager wince. His breathing was getting faster. His hands were getting worse. He was spiraling the way new employees spiral when they realize they're failing and nobody is coming to help. Wendy set down his own work. He walked over to Tyler's station, stood beside him, and placed one hand flat on the cutting board. Not on Tyler, not on the knife, just on the board. A grounding gesture. "Like this," Wendy said. His voice was low, steady. He picked up a chicken breast, positioned it, and made 3 clean cuts. Then he handed the knife back to Tyler. "Don't rush. The chicken's not going anywhere." Tyler laughed a single nervous exhale and tried again. Better this time. Wendy watched for another 30 seconds, nodded once, and returned to his own station. That was it. No lecture, no condescension, no performance for an audience. Just one person recognizing that another person was drowning and reaching out a hand. Kara saw the whole thing from across the kitchen, her mop moving in slow mechanical arcs. Nobody else saw it. By the end of her first week, Kara had gathered everything she needed. The branch had operational issues, fixable ones. Poor inventory management, outdated equipment, a night shift that was understaffed and poorly supervised. She could write her report, fly home, implement changes from behind her desk, and never think about this place again. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. But Wendy Hill was not in the plan. She couldn't stop thinking about his hands. The way they moved over the cutting board, not like a man doing a job, but like a man practicing a craft he had been trained for and then somehow separated from. Prep work at 2 in the morning was beneath his skill level, and they both knew it. Yet he showed up every night, silent and steady, and never once indicated that he deserved better. That was the part Kara couldn't reconcile. In her experience, people with talent either leveraged it or resented its waste. They climbed or they burned. Wendy did neither. He simply worked. He simply endured. And the question that kept circling back, the one she couldn't answer from behind the safe distance of a clipboard and a cover story, was the simplest one. Why? Why did a man with the hands of a trained chef accept the worst shift, the lowest position, and the complete invisibility that came with both? On the 6th morning, as the sky outside the kitchen's narrow windows shifted from black to a bruised purple, Kara made her decision. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. She told herself it was professional, that understanding Wendy could help her understand the systemic failures that allowed someone like him to fall through the cracks. But that was the version she could put in a memo. The truth was messy. The truth was that she had spent 5 nights watching a man pour himself into a building that didn't even know his name, and she wanted to know what was holding him together. This was no longer about evaluating a system. This was about one person. The second week was harder than the first. Not physically. Kara had adjusted to the mop, the bleach, the hours that turned her internal clock inside out. The difficulty was Wendy himself. Getting close to him was like trying to hold water. Every time she thought she had found an opening, it slipped through. She started small. A comment about the weather as she refilled the mop bucket near his station. A question about whether the walk-in cooler had always made that rattling sound. The kinds of things co-workers said to each other at 2 in the morning when the silence became too heavy. Wendy responded to all of it. He was never rude, never dismissive. He would answer her question, yes, the cooler had rattled like that since last winter, and then return to his work with a finality that made it clear the conversation was over. He had a way of closing doors without slamming them. Polite, practiced, absolute. Over the next 3 nights, Kara pieced together fragments, not from what Wendy said, but from what he didn't. He never mentioned anyone waiting for him at home. He never talked about weekends, hobbies, or plans. When other night crew members, there were only 2 others, both part-timers who treated the shift like a sentence to be endured, complained about missing a concert or a friend's birthday, Wendy listened without contributing. He existed in the present tense of the kitchen, as if the world outside its walls didn't apply to him. But certain details leaked through despite his discipline. He always refused day shifts. Kara had overheard Derek offering him one not out of kindness, but because a daytime prep worker had quit without notice and the branch was desperate. The day shift paid $2 more per hour. Wendy turned it down without explanation. Derek shrugged and moved on. To him, it was one less problem to solve. To Kara, it was another piece of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. There was also the phone. Wendy kept it in his back pocket, always on vibrate. Most nights it stayed silent, but between 5 and 6 in the morning, as his shift neared its end, the phone would buzz sometimes once, sometimes 3 or 4 times in quick succession. Wendy would glance at the screen and something in his expression would shift. Not alarm, not annoyance, something closer to gravity, a pull from somewhere outside the kitchen that he acknowledged but never acted on during work hours. He never answered, he never stepped away. He just looked, and then he kept cutting. And he always left the moment his shift ended, not a minute before, not a minute after. Other workers lingered, finishing a cigarette by the back door, scrolling through their phones in the break room, stretching out the transition between work and whatever waited on the other side. Wendy clocked out and disappeared. Every single night, like a man keeping a promise to someone who was counting the minutes. Kara filed all of it away. She was building a portrait from negative space, not what Wendy showed the world, but the shape of everything he was hiding. On the 9th morning, she found the first real edge of the picture. Her shift ended at 6. She peeled off her rubber gloves, hung her apron in the maintenance closet, and walked out through the back exit into the gray light of early dawn. The parking lot was nearly empty, a few cars belonging to the morning crew just arriving, the dumpsters lined up against the far wall like sleeping animals. Wendy's car was parked in the corner farthest from the building. An older sedan, dark blue with a dent in the rear fender and a child's car seat visible through the back window. He was sitting in the driver's seat with his head resting against the steering wheel. Not sleeping, just still. His eyes were closed, and his chest rose and fell with the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone gathering himself, pulling the pieces back together before facing whatever came next. Kara watched from 30 feet away, standing near the exit door with her jacket half zipped. After a long moment, Wendy lifted his head. He rubbed his face with both hands, started the engine, and drove out of the lot without looking back. She stood there for a while after he was gone, staring at the empty parking space. The child's car seat. That detail sat in her chest like a stone. The next night it happened without either of them planning it. The kitchen was quieter than usual. One of the part-timers had called out, leaving only Wendy and Kara in the building for the first 3 hours of the shift. They worked in parallel silence, Wendy at his station, Kara cleaning the floor drains nearby. Around 4:30, Wendy walked to the small alcove near the dry storage shelves where employees sometimes sat during breaks. He leaned against the wall, a paper cup of water in his hand, and closed his eyes. Kara was wiping down the shelving unit beside him. She didn't say anything. She just worked, letting the quiet do what quiet sometimes does between two people who have occupied the same space long enough to stop performing. Wendy spoke first. His voice was low, almost to himself, as if he was thinking out loud rather than starting a conversation. I have to be home before 6. Kara kept wiping. She didn't turn. Early riser. Wendy took a slow sip of water. My son, he's 4, wakes up around 6:15 and if I'm not there, he gets scared. The words landed in the space between them with the weight of something that had been carried alone for a very long time. Kara let them settle before responding. No one else at home to be with him? Wendy looked down at the paper cup in his hand, turning it slowly between his fingers. No, it's just us. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The sentence held everything, every refused day shift, every unanswered phone buzz, every sprint to the parking lot the moment the clock released him. Wendy wasn't choosing the night shift. He was choosing his son. The night was the only window where he could work without leaving a 4-year-old alone. Kara felt something tighten behind her ribs. Not pity, recognition. She had built her company by understanding systems, but this was not a system. This was a man who had divided himself in two: father by day, laborer by night, and was running on whatever was left in between. She wanted to ask more. She didn't. Wendy had given her a small, precise piece of himself, and pushing further would have broken whatever fragile trust had allowed him to offer it. Over the following nights, the picture filled in not through interrogation, but through the natural accumulation of proximity and time. Tyler, the young new hire Wendy had helped during Kara's first week, turned out to be a talker. He admired Wendy with the unguarded openness of someone too young to know that admiration could make people uncomfortable. One night, while Wendy was in the walk-in cooler, Tyler mentioned something to Kara as she mopped near his station. "You know he used to work at Bellamy's, right?" Tyler said, keeping his voice low as if sharing a secret. "Downtown, the real one, not the catering side." Kara knew Bellamy's. Everyone in the restaurant industry knew Bellamy's. It was one of the most respected kitchens in the city, the kind of place where line cooks trained for years just to earn a permanent station. "He told you that?" Kara asked. Tyler shook his head. "Nah, he doesn't talk about himself like that. I looked him up after he showed me that chicken thing. Found an old article about Bellamy's kitchen team from like 5 years ago. He's in the photo, standing right next to the head chef." Tyler pulled out his phone and scrolled. Kara didn't ask to see the photo. She didn't need to. The knife work, the claw grip, the instinct to teach, it all made sense now. Wendy hadn't learned to cook in a place like this. He had trained in a kitchen where precision was a language, and he still spoke it fluently. What she couldn't understand, what the photo and Tyler's gossip couldn't explain, was how a man with that background had ended up doing overnight prep in a failing branch of a mid-tier restaurant chain, earning barely enough to keep the lights on. The answer came a few nights later. Not from Tyler, not from snooping, but from Wendy himself. It was close to 5 in the morning, a slow night. Wendy was cleaning his station, the final ritual of every shift performed with the same care he gave the first cut of the night. Kara was nearby emptying a trash bin. Something about the hour, or the fatigue, or the fact that they had now shared enough silent shifts to build a kind of wordless trust, made Wendy talk. He told her about his mother. She had gotten sick 2 years ago, a stroke that left her partially paralyzed and in need of daily care. His wife had left before that when their son was still an infant. Wendy had managed for a while, juggling day shifts and a rotating cast of babysitters he couldn't afford. But when his mother's condition worsened, the math stopped working. He couldn't pay for childcare, elder care, and rent on a cook's salary, not in this city, not at the hours a real kitchen demanded. So he made a choice. He left Bellamy's. He found a job that would let him work while his son slept, be home before the boy woke up, care for his mother during the day while the boy was at a neighbor's, and sleep in whatever fractured hours remained. It wasn't a career. It was a survival schedule built around two people who needed him more than he needed a future. He told Kara all of this in the same tone he used to give Tyler instructions, calm, factual, stripped of self-pity, as if he were describing a recipe. Step 1, wake up. Step 2, keep going. Step 3, repeat. Kara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked one question. "Do you miss it, cooking, I mean? Real cooking?" Wendy rinsed his knife under the faucet and dried it with a clean towel, taking his time with the blade. Missing it doesn't change anything. That was the last thing he said before clocking out. 2 weeks into Kara's time at the branch, a company-wide memo arrived. She knew about it before it was posted. She had approved the policy herself 3 months ago from a conference room 600 miles away. Restructuring night operations across underperforming locations, reducing overnight staffing to skeleton crews, eliminating redundant prep positions. The language was clean, strategic, the kind of language that looked responsible in a board presentation. Projected savings of $1.2 million annually, improved operational efficiency, streamlined labor allocation. Derek posted the memo on the break room bulletin board on a Tuesday morning right before the night crew arrived. He delivered the news the way he delivered everything, quickly, without ceremony, already mentally moving to the next task. Corporates cutting night shifts at low-performing branches, Derek said to the small group gathered in the break room. This location's on the list. Some positions are getting eliminated. You'll know by the end of the month. Wendy stood near the back wall, arms at his sides. His face revealed nothing. When the room cleared, he approached Derek. Kara was mopping the hallway just outside the break room door, close enough to hear. "When does it take effect?" Wendy asked. His voice was even. Derek checked his phone. "Probably 3 weeks, maybe 4. They're still finalizing." Wendy nodded once, then walked to his station and began prepping as if nothing had changed. Later, when Wendy was out of earshot, Derek leaned against the break room doorframe and said something to Kara as she passed. "Guys like him always land on their feet. Don't worry about it." He said it casually, the way people say things about other people's lives when they've never had to fight for their own. Kara didn't respond. She pushed her mop forward and kept moving. The days after the announcement, Wendy didn't change his routine. He still arrived first. He still prepped with the same mechanical precision. He still left the moment his shift ended. But Kara noticed things that weren't there before. The slight tremor in his left hand during the 4th hour. The way his eyes unfocused for a second too long when he reached for a new bunch of carrots. The deepening shadows beneath his eyes that even the harsh fluorescent light couldn't wash out. He was running out. Not all at once. Wendy was not the kind of man who fell apart in public. But the reserves he had been drawing from the ones that let him split himself between father and worker and caretaker were draining faster than he could refill them. The announcement hadn't broken him. It had simply added weight to a load that was already at its limit. It happened on a Thursday, 11 days after the memo went up. Wendy was halfway through his prep cycle, 2:30 in the morning, the kitchen silent except for the wheeze of the ventilation system. Not a cry for help. Just a body that had reached the end of what willpower could demand of it. Wendy sat there, breathing slowly, staring at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. And for the first time since she had walked into this kitchen, Kara did not feel like an observer. She felt like a witness. There was a difference. Observers collected data. Witnesses carried responsibility. She sat with him until his breathing steadied. She didn't touch him, didn't offer comfort, didn't say it would be okay. She just stayed. And in the terrible quiet of that kitchen under lights that made everything look clinical and cold, she understood something that no report, no policy review, no boardroom discussion had ever made clear. This was what the numbers looked like when they were a person. Kara drove back to her hotel that morning with the window down, letting the cold air cut across her face. The city was waking up around her, delivery trucks, early joggers, the first buses grinding along their routes. But she saw none of it. She saw Wendy on the kitchen floor. She saw Derek checking his phone. She saw a half-cut bell pepper sitting on the edge of a cutting board like a sentence left unfinished. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed, still in her maintenance uniform, and opened her laptop. The restructuring memo was in her inbox, the same one Derek had pinned to the break room bulletin board. She had read it dozens of times before. She had helped draft it. The language was hers: streamlined labor allocation, projected savings of $1.2 million annually, optimized staffing models for underperforming locations. She read it again now, and every word felt different. Not wrong, exactly. Worse than wrong. Indifferent. The memo didn't account for a man who worked through the night so his 4-year-old son wouldn't wake up alone. It didn't account for a former chef who had traded his career for a survival schedule. It didn't account for a body collapsing on a kitchen floor at 2:30 in the morning because there was nothing left to give. The memo didn't account for Wendy because it wasn't designed to, and Kara had designed it. She closed the laptop. The question she had been circling for days finally landed with its full weight. If she walked away, now packed up her cover story and flew home to make adjustments from the safe distance of a corporate office. How was she any different from Derek? Derek didn't see Wendy because he didn't care to look. Kara had looked. She had seen everything. And silence after seeing was not neutrality. It was a choice. She spent the rest of that day making a different one. The next evening, Kara arrived at the restaurant an hour before the night shift began. She had changed out of the maintenance uniform. She wore her own clothes, simple, professional, nothing extravagant. She carried no clipboard, no folder, no props. She waited in the break room. Wendy walked in at 1:30 the way he always did. He stopped when he saw her sitting at the table dressed differently, looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. "I need to talk to you," Kara said, "and I need you to hear the whole thing before you decide what to do with it." Wendy set his bag down slowly. He didn't sit. Kara told him all of it. She told him her real name, her title, the reason she had come to this branch in the first place. She told him she was the CEO of the company that employed him, the same company that had issued the memo threatening to eliminate his position. She told him she had spent nearly 4 weeks mopping floors and watching him work, and that nothing she had seen from the inside of this building matched what she had believed from the outside. Wendy listened without moving. His face went through something that was hard to read. Not shock, not relief. A slow, careful rearrangement, like a man reassessing every interaction of the past weeks through a new lens. Every question she had asked him, every moment she had been nearby. The night he told her about his son, the morning she saw him in the parking lot. When she finished, the silence between them was heavy enough to press against the walls. Wendy looked at the floor, then at her. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried an edge she had never heard from him before. "So all this time, the mop, the uniform, the questions, I was being watched." It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with the controlled precision of a man who had learned long ago to hold his anger in both hands. "You stood there and watched me fall apart on that kitchen floor, and you knew who you were the whole time." Kara held his gaze. She didn't flinch, didn't reach for justification. "Yes." "Was I a project?" Wendy asked. His jaw tightened. "Something to put in a report, a story for the next board meeting about how the CEO really cares?" "I came here for the system," Kara said. "I stayed because of you. That's the truth, and I know it doesn't make it better. You trusted someone who wasn't real, and I can't undo that. If you don't want to hear anything else from me, I'll respect it." Wendy picked up his bag. He walked past her through the break room door and into the kitchen. A few seconds later, Kara heard the back exit open and close. He didn't come in for his next shift. Kara didn't call him. She didn't send a message through Derek or ask Tyler if he had heard anything. She had made her disclosure, and now the only thing she could offer Wendy was the one thing no one in his life seemed to give him space to decide on his own terms. 2 nights passed. On the 3rd night, Wendy walked into the kitchen at 1:35, 5 minutes later than usual. He put on his apron, pulled his knife roll from his bag, and set up his station. Kara was in the break room, still in her own clothes. She hadn't picked up a mop since the night she told him. Wendy appeared in the doorway. He didn't sit down. He looked at her the way someone looks at a locked door they're deciding whether to open. "What are you going to do?" he asked. 4 words. No anger this time, but no warmth either. Just a man standing at the edge of something, asking whether the ground ahead was solid. Kara didn't make promises. She laid out what she intended plainly, the way Wendy himself spoke without decoration. She was restructuring the night shift policy, not just at this branch across the chain. The blanket elimination of overnight positions would be replaced with a flexible scheduling model that accounted for employees whose circumstances required non-traditional hours. Single parents, caregivers, people whose lives didn't fit inside a 9-to-5 frame. It wasn't charity, it was an operational correction. The old policy had been built on the assumption that all labor was interchangeable. It wasn't. She was implementing a support program for employees with caregiving responsibilities, subsidized childcare referrals, emergency family assistance, healthcare benefits extended to dependents. Again, not for Wendy specifically. For everyone the system had been ignoring. And for Wendy himself, she was offering him a place in the company's internal culinary training program. A path back to the work he had been trained for, structured around a schedule that wouldn't force him to choose between his son and his craft. Not a promotion handed down out of pity. A door opened because he had already proven every night for months that he belonged on the other side of it. She also told him she would be having a conversation with Derek. Not to fire him, Derek wasn't cruel, just blind in the way the system had taught him to be. He would be enrolled in a management development program, one that taught supervisors to see the people behind the positions. The problem had never been Derek alone. It was the culture that produced him. Wendy listened to all of it. He didn't nod. He didn't thank her. He stood in the doorway with his arms at his sides, processing it the way he processed everything internally, methodically, without performance. Finally, he said, "I'm going to finish my shift." He turned and walked back to his station. A moment later, the familiar sound of his knife filled the kitchen. Tap, 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 steady, precise, unbroken. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't gratitude. It was something more honest than either. It was a man picking up his knife and continuing, because that was what he had always done. The only difference was that now someone had finally built a floor beneath him. 3 months later, the Midtown branch kitchen looked different in the early morning light. New equipment had replaced the wheezing ventilation system. The fryer that should have been swapped out years ago was gone. The fluorescent lights still buzzed, but someone had replaced the flickering tubes, and the light fell evenly now across the stainless steel surfaces. Wendy stood at the main prep station during the early morning shift, not the graveyard hours anymore, but a 6 to 2 window that let him work, while his son spent mornings with a licensed caregiver, one arranged through the company's new family assistance program. It was the first time in 2 years Wendy hadn't had to build his entire life around the hours between midnight and dawn. He was halfway through the culinary training program, and the change showed not in his technique that had always been there, but in the way he occupied the kitchen. He moved like someone who belonged, not someone who was borrowing space. Beside him stood a new hire, a woman in her 20s, nervous the way Tyler had once been nervous, fumbling with a mandolin she clearly hadn't used before. Wendy reached over and adjusted her grip, guiding the angle of the blade without taking the tool from her hands. "Slow down," he said. "You're not racing anyone." She nodded and tried again. Better. Someone from the morning crew walked past and stopped watching Wendy work for a moment. "Where'd you learn to cut like that?" he asked. Wendy looked up. For just a moment something crossed his face, not the guarded blankness Kara had seen for nearly 4 weeks, but something softer, a flicker of the man he had been before the world demanded he become something smaller. He smiled. It was brief, barely there, but it was real. "Long time ago," Wendy said. Then he turned back to the cutting board. Kara was not in the kitchen that morning. She was 600 miles away in a conference room reviewing the rollout of the flexible scheduling initiative across 12 more branches. She would never mop another floor. She would never stand in a parking lot watching a man rest his head against a steering wheel. That chapter was closed, but the system she had changed kept running without her, and that she had come to understand was the whole point. The measure of what she had done was not in the moment she revealed herself, or the promises she made in a break room late at night. It was in this, a kitchen operating quietly at 7 in the morning, a man teaching someone how to hold a blade, a 4-year-old boy who no longer woke up in an empty house. Sometimes the strongest people don't need to be sane. They just need to be seen. And maybe that's the thing worth remembering, not just from Wendy's story, but from any moment when we walk past someone working in silence, carrying more than we'll ever know. You don't have to be a CEO to change someone's life.
You just have to be the person who stops, looks, and decides that what you see matters. If this story stayed with you even a little, then carry it forward. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this about ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the quietest corners of the world, subscribe and stick around. Because every week we find another story that deserves to be told.
And the next one might be the one that changes how you see the person standing right next to you.